your dice, let's roll tonight. All the fun in the spotlight. Inside sharp and laughter bright. We're tuning in for delight.
Let's see here. Is chatbot going? Yes, it is. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and get started. So, first and foremost, I'd like to formally welcome you all to Roll for Insight, hosted here on Altrole, a welcoming D&D Discord community, as you both know, okay? Or rather, as you all know, for both new and returning players. So, whether you're diving into 5e or if you're exploring the latest and greatest in 5.24, Oro offers a supportive space to learn, play, and grow as a player or DM. Now, of course, here on Oro, we host weekly classes for both new players and first-time DMs. Even experienced players can get a little something for our wonderful classes and events. We also run community events and workshops, and on top of all that, we support groups running their own campaigns right here on the server. So, as they like to say, come for the guidance and stay for the game nights. Now, Roll for Insight is one of those community events, a one-on-one interview series where we sit down with our experienced dungeon masters to get a behind-the-scenes look at their process, their tips, and perhaps even some of the memorable moments. So whether you're a veteran DM or just starting out, or if you're just simply curious about the art of storytelling here in D&D, there's always something here for everybody. Now, we'll be asking a mix of prepared questions and questions from our lovely community there. Now, diving into topics like word building, running encounters, and of course, handling players. And as always, there'll be time at the end for an audience Q&A. So feel free to think about any questions you'd like to have answered, and we can go about and ask our guest at the very end. With that being said, let's dive on in and roll for insight. So, the first question of tonight there, Peregrine, is what's the most challenging campaign you have ever run?
That's kind of a that's kind of a tough question, I think, mainly because when I first, I started playing D&D very long ago, like when I was, in junior high school or something like that, and frankly, at the time it was challenging because like no one had any clue what to do. But for 5e, I've run a few campaigns now, so I'd say they're all difficult and all easy in different, in different senses. But probably the first one I ran at 5e when I started playing, I hadn't played D&D in a number of years, probably 10, 15 years, probably before the COVID started. And my brother offered to run a game, and I was like, well, I'll jump in and join. And he ran a game for several months, and then he was like, well, I'm kind of tired of DMing. Maybe you can do it. So being kind of thrust in a little bit, with the same players that I knew, but going from the player to the DM role, it was definitely challenging. And I don't know, I struggled a bit because I was pretty new to like being really good with the rules and stuff of 5e. So I kind of hammered along, and we ended up, playing for another good, probably most of a year before the campaign ended. So, I was happy with that. And then, from there, at least I had something to build on.
Well, that's quite the achievement there. Making the jump from player to DM is always a bit harder at the very first time. And I must say, you sounds like you handled it valiantly, very, very well. Do you remember what kind of campaign you ran? If it was high fantasy, perhaps was it a module, or did you have a homebrew?
Pretty much all my campaigns are homebrew, I would consider. The first campaign I ran, I used the Greyhawk setting, but I kind of homebrewed like within that because my brother had already run Ghost of Saltmarsh campaign, which is, if people don't
Hmm.
know, that game that is actually set in the old Greyhawk setting. Um,
Mm.
so and I'm always been very comfortable with homebrew, but in that one, I think it was more high fantasy than most, especially because we had a lot of magic users in the party. I mean, we had a bard, we had a wizard, we had a druid, we had a lot of casters, so it was inevitable that there was going to be like very large amounts of magic, and including a wild magic sorcerer. And as you know, that's always a a bit of a, you never know. That's a wild.
That actually segues us very nicely into our next question, which is how do you balance magic and non magic in your world?
Well, I kind of like I like to I want to play within the 5e system. I don't do a lot of like homebrew of characters or rules. I like to stay within the existing system, but which is, a very high magic system, but at the same time, I for the world I like to dial it back a little bit. And how that is accomplished can be different in different campaigns. Like my second campaign I ran, the setting was that it was this huge empire that had controlled just continents, and it had all come crashing down in this big war with these barbarians. And so the party started in this sort of like last town that survived. And so of course, so many mages had been killed that it was inevitable that it was kind of lower magic than usual, just because like most of them were dead in the war. um and in another one, it's simply that it's a little bit of a magical backwater where there just aren't very many powerful mages. So it's the party, of course, can be, whatever class they want to be, but I just like to dial it back a little. One of these days maybe I should run a really high magic campaign, Eberron, something like that, where it's, everything is all about magic, but I haven't done that yet.
Well, this sounds like there's plenty of time left in your career there to fire off one of those there.
Hopefully.
Now, oh, of course, it sounds like you're a very accomplished DM, so you have plenty of time. And you know what? One of these days, perhaps even I myself might be graced in one of your campaigns, or might have the pleasure of participating in one of the campaigns, if I can, of course, find the time.
Yeah, that timing is
Indeed,
always the concern, right, with everyone.
indeed.
Schedule.
With that, I'd like to talk about magic a little more. So, quick question: how do you handle resurrection spells and the idea of the afterlife in your world?
I feel like the way D&D is or 5e is set up, clearly they are expecting there to be a lot of resurrection magic. I mean, I was having a discussion about this with some people in one of my games a couple weeks ago, and for example, the revivify spell I think was only added in 4e, and in all previous versions, that didn't exist. So you had to have raised dead or nothing. Um, or higher level spells than that. So in terms of, I found I've actually always been fascinated with the idea that you could have a really interesting afterlife. Um, that like there's some video games, for example, the Pillar of Eternity series, which have really cool ideas about the afterlife. But I have to say, I kind of stick to a more simple version, and pretty much that it's a mystery. And of course, if you're brought back, or if maybe you speak with dead or something, you can kind of like pierce through the veil, but it's not something that you're going to be remembering. Oh, yeah, I remember I was walking around in the strange land. So, anyway, that's how I do it.
Well, that sounds like a very wonderful approach. The whole idea, the whole concept of the great beyond there, it really is sounds
Mhm.
appealing, and it helps to preserve the mystery that of what lies beyond as well. So, kudos to you. Very, very good idea. Now, let's get into some more nitty gritty, perhaps even more logistical questions. Like, take for example, what is your go-to strategy for planning encounters? Do you have a particular,
I think any player that has played in any of my games will know that I love to homebrew monsters. So I rarely start with what might be in the monster manual, or if I do, it might be changed beyond recognition. So, if it's going to be a combat encounter, I'm always looking for some kind of neat idea that I've never done before. Um, and so, not every fight has to be some radical, strange thing. Sometimes, you really need to get ambushed by goblins. But in terms of non combat encounters, I guess I really like to take the party in mind. In other words, things like skill checks, knowing what the party is good at and what they aren't. I don't want to keep challenging them, to make, animal handling checks when no one in the in the party is good at animal handling. I feel like you want to
Hmm.
kind of like give people a chance to flex their, character's muscles in stuff that they're good at. But at the same time, I like to have stuff not necessarily be if fixed by just say a persuasion roll. Like there's time and a place for persuasion, but it shouldn't be like a be all and end all that like instantly fixes any, social problem or social encounter.
Fair enough. So it sounds like you like to tailor make your more, let's say, role playing encounters and social encounters towards the strengths of your party so that when they do roll, it'll be,
Yeah.
I suppose,
Ideally.
more conducive to their style of play.
And also, some of it is just about what the party is like. Like
Hmm.
some parties just like certain things and they don't like certain things. So I don't want to keep throwing like a bunch of politics and like investigating mysterious stuff if the party, doesn't find that fun. I mean, that's pretty basic DMing, I would think. But of course, it takes a while to
That right.
actually get to the point where they like. So
Fair enough. It does take a good amount of experience and a little bit of people reading, but that right there, folks, is a sign of a great DM. You cater to your audience. Indeed, indeed. Now, to explore into the various kinds of encounters, I'd like to ask a question. What is your approach to designing traps and puzzles? Do you employ those quite often?
I would say I don't. And probably I should. I always want to use them more often, but probably like a lot of DMs, I find that, you know, the party gets stuck a lot and it's no knock on them. I mean, of course what I'm writing down, I'm thinking, well, everyone's going to understand what this means, but of course the party may not, and I don't want to like leave them in the lurch where there's no obvious solution, or I just sort of have to like eventually tell them. So I don't use them a lot. Well, puzzles, I guess I'm speaking more of. But if I do, I try to have it at least be something interesting and not random. So, for example, I wrote an encounter where the party was trying to investigate this ancient mage's. Well, they didn't really know what it was. It was a place where an ancient mage had lived, and they needed information about him. So when they started going underground, they started finding all these tablets that had different symbols on them, like say 3 circles inside a triangle. And of course, they kicked around a lot what the meaning of those were. They figured out pretty quick that, this is a pattern that we have to activate these. And each tablet also had a school of magic applied. So they figured out that part pretty easy, but not necessarily the order. So, after a while, they presented a solution which I thought was good enough, even though it was not what I had in mind. And I said, "Great, let's go on. It works, and let's move on with the adventure."
And that right there is another great sign there of a great DM. Um, just to mirror what Peregrine was saying, the players can and parties can often get hung up on certain game mechanics or even puzzles. And it's very important to just kind of push past that, especially if they're having trouble, because you really want to preserve the whole aspect of fun there. So,
Exactly.
that's
I'm a strong believer in what's called the rule of three, which is not just with traps and puzzles, but just
Mhm.
anytime you present something that you want the party to figure out, that you want to give them at least 3 clues or 3 ways that it could be solved, because otherwise you end up stuck, and then you don't want to have to like just suddenly come up with something that seems like nonsense. I mean, the players don't like a Deus Ex Machina, most of the time.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, Peregrine, to speak about your players' creativity or your party's creativity and what they would consider an acceptable solution or perhaps a way forward, a way to progress, do you believe that DMs should allow their players to create their own quests or perhaps even inject their own creativity into the world itself?
I well, I guess that's not something I've really done before, but I'm not against it. I mean, I think it, especially when it comes to world building. I mean, you've got a huge world out there, and so if somebody has a really cool idea, there's no reason why the player couldn't be tasked with doing that. It's something that I think I would be actually much more fun to do. The problem is then I would think how to integrate the player in, the character into the quest, because they don't, if they already know how the quest is solved because they made it, it might be trickier for them to like avoid metagaming. But
A very fair point.
it's pretty neat. For me, in terms of player input, I think a lot of it comes during character creation, because the
Hmm.
players are always coming up with these neat ideas of part of their backstories, and I'm like, well, I had never even thought about that, but I'm dropping that right into the world immediately.
Indeed, indeed. I like to call those, or in my experience, I like to call those the what if moments there, where typically a player will inject some really cool idea into the discussion, or perhaps they'll just think of something on the fly and they'll say it in passing in the session, like, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if?" And then, as the DM, you'll go, "Oh, well, that's rather interesting." Scribble, scribble, write it down, and then perhaps it
Exactly.
comes up later.
Right, exactly.
Indeed, indeed. Now, in that particular spirit there, um, of fun, I have to ask you this question: what do you think is more important, fun or the rules?
Yeah, it's a tough it's a tough question because, you know, basically it's DM style, which as we all know is, and I'm sure from interviewing people on this, that it's widely varied.
Hmm.
I'm a kind of big rules person. In other words, like I like to have everything strongly based on the rules. But of course, it's a game. We're here to have fun, so fun definitely has its part. But I
Hmm.
like to have the fun, more through like social interaction or funny stuff that happens, instead of people just the party just doing crazy stuff off the cuff. Which I'm not saying there's not a place for that. Of course there is, but for the way I like to do things, I guess I'm kind of more of an old school DM, and I think we the old school DMs, we were like all about the rules, and you know not there was not rule of cool, put it that way, and sometimes
Hmm.
that became a big negative. So I like to think I'm not so much that it becomes a negative, but that's kind of where I stand, and I think my players they know that.
Ah, yes, firm but fair. Firm but fair, it sounds.
Hopefully.
Now, I'm curious there, Peregrine. Given your knowledge of the rules, I imagine you could make some really, really cool character concepts there. So I have a little bit of a challenge for you there. If you could make any historical figure into a D&D character, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that is a great one. And I think it's just because I have done that occasionally in the past, or at least my view of a historical figure. Um, I think I don't know. Maybe I'm. To me, I would love to make somebody like the Greek philosophers, like Plato or Socrates or one of these people, because they just they had all these great ideas, and I just think it would be really neat to inject them into the less 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 like I'm trying to find the word, I guess, less strictly academic sense. So okay, you have to deal with this philosopher who's got all these great ideas and he's super smart, but maybe he's not that good at the day-to-day existence, and maybe that's why thieves have been robbing him blind, and the person's housekeeper has to bring the party in to like catch the thieves because he's so up in the clouds that he has no idea what's going on in the real world type thing. So
Yes,
I
yes.
don't I wouldn't of course use the same name, but hey, I love history. It's kind of an obsession of mine. It's something I've always been interested in. So it's such a rich vein to mine. So why not?
Of course, of course. And you know what? There's plenty of precedents where you'll see ancient mythology being incorporated into the D&D lore landscape as well. I mean, take for example, Theros, right? Um, a lot of that is based in Greek mythology there. So, I mean, if they can do it, you can most certainly do so as well.
Yeah, there's a great website that somebody did this a number of years ago, and I, I always show it to people because they went through the monster manual of original 5e at the time, and they just figured
Mhm.
out where the like origins were of all the creatures, and almost a huge number of them are from real life mythology, or of one type or another.
Indeed, indeed. I would be very curious to see where slimes came from because those things, oh, they are one of the most, as I would say, interesting creatures because they don't seem formidable, but when you read their stat blocks and you get into the higher CRs of said slimes and oozes, oh, they can be very nasty. Now, on that particular notion there, Peregrine, if, and since you do homebrew quite a bit there, if you could create a new type of monster for D&D right off the top of your head, what would it be?
Well, I don't think it's ever a bad thing to like start from things that already exist within the game. Um,
Hmm.
so, for example, you have something that's kind of, a somewhat iconic monster, but it's also kind of limited, like the ogre. And I think in previous versions, you actually had the ogre mage, which was like this really smart spellcasting version of the ogre. But I like to make an ogre which was, more intelligent and not just stupid, but, and it was a thing you could play for comic relief or however you want. What I really like to do is twist existing monsters into a new version. Like I had this adventure where the party was in basically the Underdark, and I wanted to have something that was a lot like a vampire, but it wasn't. It would have sort of the same, like energy draining, blood sucking, whatever effect, but it was a totally different kind of creature, and it was this like feral creature that could crawl through the rocks of this like ruin and like drain people like psychically from a short distance away and things like that. So it was, sort of a vampire, but like very different.
That sounds like an emotional vampire right there.
Kind of, yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of this TV show actually, but I
I have
digress.
been watching. I have been watching What We Do in the Shadows recently myself. So
Thank
yeah,
you, thank you, thank
exactly.
you.
Yep, I knew where you were going there.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I have another mechanics logistics question for you to hopefully tap into your experience and veterancy as a DM there. Um, Game mechanics and narrative, when they do clash, how do you manage to find balance?
Yeah, that can be a tough one. Um, and especially, I think consistency is important because you want to make sure that the players, um, they don't feel that the actual mechanics of the game like override the like story elements. They don't want to, they want to have a cool story where they're the heroes. They don't want to have like a story where they feel like bound down by like the constant mechanic. But if you go the other way, you end up in a situation where the mechanics don't feel consistent. And I feel like, as a DM, you really have to strive for consistency, because otherwise it just,
Mm.
people don't know where they stand exactly. Um, so what I like to do is, you know, I guess the examples you usually see is what if the player tries something crazy? Like, are you going to just say like, yes, it works? So what I like to do is I'll tell them you can try anything you want, but there's always going to be a die roll behind it. And if you want to, you know, leap onto the table, angle it down, slide down, jump over one of the orcs, grab onto a rope and like swing to the other side of the room, it's great. But you have to roll. And if you roll great, maybe that works. But if you roll not great, then maybe something really bad happened. So, and they tend to be okay with that. So,
Of course, of
and
course.
I find that players often remember the time stuff didn't work out more than the times it did.
don't those types of moments make for the greatest of stories, right?
Exactly. I mean,
Indeed, indeed.
I've been my friend has been playing running a story arc for this old campaign that I ran currently, and one time the party's monk like rolled a one when he was trying to climb up a wall, and so he still has this like stereotype where anytime he has to climb up a wall, we're like, be careful. So you can't outlive it.
Yes, indeed. Just harkening back to those moments of failure that just kind of stick with them forever. That actually kind of reminds me about one of the previous instructors here on Altrole there, and something they said stuck with me all these months, all these days, all these years, so to speak. Um, one of the responsibilities, and perhaps one of the greatest responsibilities of DM, is to dole out consequences. The reason being to provide impact and import to the choices and to the agency of your players. So you have zero control into what kind of choices they're going to make, whether they be good, bad, wise, or poor. It does not matter. It is their right, their responsibility to make a choice, and yours as a DM to dole out said consequences.
Yeah, I never really thought of it that way, but that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Indeed. Well, thank you for allowing me to share that there. Now, conversely, many players I find tend to be, how should I say, very polite, very, very adherent to the rules and to the setting, and of course to the storytelling, you know, drafted by the DM there. But in the rare case, you do happen to find a player who tries to take control of the story to probably, how should I say, stay in the spotlight a little too long, to try to twist the narrative towards their own kind of singular purpose. Peregrine, how would you handle, or how have you handled a player like that before?
Yeah, it can be a problem. I haven't had many, luckily, or for whatever reason, I haven't had a lot of players that really try to do that. But I feel like it's not so much of or a lot of times it's not so much of a clash with the DM. Like it's not like the DM's like, I want this to happen, and the player's like, no. I feel like in the end, it's really usually a clash between that player and other players. I had a situation in one of my, long running games, which is since finished, that, you know, we had one player he was very interested in stuff about his character and he had all these great ideas and a lot of interesting stuff. But if stuff role play was not about his character, he was, a lot of times just kind of idled out and was not very responsive. And I didn't realize that this was causing a problem behind the scenes between him and another player. And, I literally only became aware of it when, it blew up into drama and they both quit. And,
Oh dear.
that was probably, I feel like I could have maybe been more aware of that situation. Um, I've had only one, I think one player who was like, I don't mind a player who's a bit chaotic, but the player was like so chaotic that it was hard for anyone to even get much else done because they were always just doing these crazy things. And the rest of the party was essentially stuck in the role of like permanently reacting to them. And
Hmm.
in that case, I sort of, after one particularly bad incident, I just sort of talked to him and I was like, I'm not saying you have to leave the game, but we have to talk about this, maybe adjusting some things about the character. He made the choice to just leave the game. So without much, telling me anything. So I don't know if he just didn't like the idea of any correction or change of his behavior or what, but I guess it ended up sort of like the best for both of us.
People often forget that D&D is a shared group collaboration of storytelling, of play, of creativity, and of imagination. And when players forget that, it hurts the entirety of the group and the campaign. And it's a shame. It really, really is. It really is. But it sounds like you handled those particularly tough situations quite well. So I do applaud you there, Peregrine.
I don't know. I don't know if I did or I didn't. But when the two players ended up quitting, frankly, it totally floored me because for me, came out of nowhere. And,
Hmm.
it made me think, well, in the future, I need to actually be trying to pay more attention to this and maybe talking to people privately and just saying, hey, are there any concerns? Anything going on in the group that's a big problem for you? And then, hopefully resolve it before it came to that.
Radio, radio. You're always going to have an experience like that in one's DM career there. I mean, it happens in all of life as well. It's not just solely based on, tabletop
Sure.
RPGs there. But it's exactly that. It's an experience. It's a learning point. It's a point from which you grow and you evolve from. And it sounds like you've done so quite well.
I guess you as a DM, you kind of have to just like live and learn with your experiences and try to do better next time. Like in a lot of things in life.
You get the feeling that you as a DM are basically a character in your own campaign, except your campaign is about corralling your players to, to schedule a session or, making sure that they're having fun or making sure the rules are being followed. It's just the context is a bit different, but you yourself are like a D&D character in a campaign.
I don't know. I feel like sometimes I, plan out too much, and I feel like at times that can become a problem because if the players want to do something different and you've, planned everything out in a certain direction, then, you have to, go with the fly, go wing it basically. So I don't know.
Hmm.
I guess I would describe myself as a pretty. I try to be like the diplomatic person, solving the problems, generally whether I'm the DM or not. But the DM, I guess it puts you even more in that situation.
Indeed, indeed, it does. It does and does. Speaking of peacekeeping, there, I have a rather interesting question to pose you there. So, along the lines of peace, how do you handle a player who refuses to engage in combat encounters?
I suppose refuse to. Well, I guess it would depend what you mean. Like, they just don't want to take any action, or they just do the bare minimum kind of thing.
Well, I choose to interpret the question as such, where perhaps they might have some form of moral refusal to the combat itself, whether
Mm.
that be by lifestyle choice or by creed or culture, or perhaps they don't believe in the cause in which they're fighting for.
Well, I've definitely run into a few situations like that where the character was acting a certain way based on their beliefs.
Hmm.
If it came to the player, we've had a few issues in one of my campaigns where one of the players who's normally very active and very talkative, like for some reason in combat, that he will just like shut down and even like just stop fighting and just go sit down or go do some other task. And I've never really understood why. And I know it irks some of the other players because they're like, why is this happening? I mean, clearly it's not a moral, clearly it's not a moral thing. If it came down to, something that was triggering or, something that a person just had a strong aversion to and didn't want to deal with, I feel like that's a totally different situation. As long as they're willing to talk to me about it, I'm certainly willing to find some sort of resolution, whether it's, putting them aside, giving them a separate task to do that doesn't involve, parts that they find objectionable. To be honest, that's not a problem I've really had to deal with very
Hmm.
often, but it's something to think about because honestly, it would be, I don't think I would know in the in the like if it just suddenly happened, that would be a challenge for me.
If I might offer a personal experience of mine there, it reminds me of an early campaign where the party had dwelled into the basement of a manor. And of course, one of the party members was objecting to the fact of sneaking around. The others didn't have that moral quandary, so of course the party proceeded. And it got to the point where they were stealing and looting, and of course, that particular player character did not agree with the actions of the party. So when it came down to it, and they
Sure.
wandered into a crypt where they woke up a particularly nasty beast that was acting like a guard dog. The player character that was objecting to all of this closed the door, locked it, and said, "Sort it out. This
Oh,
is, this is moral justice," as they put it.
yeah. To me, that's a problem. I mean, because essentially, you're kind of on the edge of trying to get your rest of your party killed, but at the
Hmm.
same time, it's a social game and it's hard. Like, if you're that person that's, say, playing a lawful good character and has these strong beliefs, um, how do you reconcile that with other players who or other characters who don't have those beliefs and are just kind of like off doing their own thing? Um, I guess I have a
Exactly.
little more experience with it as a player. I played in a campaign in a Curse of Strahd campaign where my character was kind of, I mean, was a rogue, but a different rogue, like a rogue that didn't really like to steal. Kind of, he had grown up as like a beggar, and he only stole to like live. And so some of the party would do things that and he was very cautious and kind of like cowardly a little bit as well. So sometimes things would happen and he would just sort of like freeze a little bit or not do anything in combat at the start. And I felt like eventually that became a bit of a problem with some of the other players because they felt like I was trying to hurt the party. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
so to me, that's a bit of a serious concern because anything like that, you can really drive a wedge between people, and you don't want to get to a situation where somebody feels like they have to quit.
That's fair. That's fair. I feel as if quite a few, quite a few, as I would call them, miscommunications like that, or perhaps transparency issues, can often usually be resolved through just, as I like to put it, open and honest communication, especially during your session zeros, or above game, right in the thick of things, and
Mm.
say, "Hey guys, this is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it," so on and so forth. And of course, while it does break immersion a little bit there, I always find that transparency and open and honest communication tends to cut through a lot of red tape there. That's something that I like to preach. I like to advocate at my tables.
Yeah, I think that you really can't go far wrong with any kind of just being transparent and being
Hmm.
open about what your expectations are and asking the players like what they're interested in and what their expectations are. Even I would say even before session zero. I mean, any player for my campaign, I definitely want to have a discussion with them before they even join the campaign about like what they're looking for. Obviously experience levels or whatever, but you know, just to see if it would be a good fit. I feel like if you don't do that, you're. I mean, most of the time it probably works out okay, but it's always nice to steer any potential problems away before people actually join your campaign if you think they wouldn't be a good fit.
Indeed, indeed, and that's again, you touched on one of the most important DM responsibilities there. It's like, as I put it colloquially, being a minesweeper,
Yeah,
a social
maybe so.
minesweeper. Yeah.
I mean, hey, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of players that would definitely be great in a certain game, but it doesn't mean that they would necessarily be a great fit in every game. So I never wanted to be like, hey, you're no good, because hey, we're DMs. We're supposed to like, honestly, I consider a big part of my job to like help new players learn more about the game, or if they're joining my game. I mean, I one of my campaigns, which is now finished, was an entirely new player campaign, and everyone we brought into it was a new player.
Indeed. Hey, Peregrine, speaking of campaigns, we have a question submitted by one of our lovely audience members, and that is, what is, within your current campaigns, the most theatrically impressive combat encounter you have come up with for a party?
Yeah, that's gonna that's gonna be a tough one, just because even though I thought about it a little bit ahead of time, it's still it's hard to because I feel like there've been quite a good number of them. Because as I said earlier, I
Mhm.
do like to come up with like interesting, monsters and that sort of thing. Um, I ran an adventure, uh, probably 2+ years ago, um, where the party, was sort of hired to find out why these miners had gone missing, and they soon found out that they were in this like dungeon that was full of like lava and heat, and they couldn't exactly figure out like what was going on, but it was very clear there was some kind of demonic things going on. So it took probably, I don't know, maybe 4 sessions or something to go through the whole thing because it was quite large. And of course, I'm thinking, oh, how do I do this like final demon? The idea was this demon was being like imprisoned here, but he was sort of gradually like breaking his way out. And so I basically ended up making a demon which had 3 phases, and each one was kind of like the same but a bit different. So they each had different
Mhm.
tokens. They each had different powers. Like one was much more of a caster. One was much more of like a this guy with chains who was trying to drag people back toward him and throw people into the lava. And of course, he
Wow.
also had a couple of like sub guys, and in addition, the party had learned that this miner had been taken prisoner, and the miner had been like converted to be this, was possessed basically. And so she also had all these magical powers, but the problem is, they didn't want to kill her because she was just possessed. So they really had to deal with,
Mhm.
you know, one boss that could change to different things, other guys, and this other person without killing her. So it really ended up being this really complex, kind of like constantly changing fight, which I was really happy with.
Indeed, it definitely sounds like mechanically very, very, very challenging, especially since the party has to almost discover those mechanics or kind of improvise battle plans on the fly, so to speak, there with each new phase. Very, very interesting indeed.
Yeah, I do love. I really go into a lot of mechanics, and necessarily some don't work as well. It's a lot of times it's experimenting.
Hmm.
I had a combat adventure not or encounter not that long ago where the party was in this land that was like everything was like dry and dust, and it appeared to be cursed. Like there had once been farms and things, and now there were just dust storms. And so the party was
Ooh.
approached by these people who looked like zombies. They were a little tougher than regular zombies because the party was like level 10, I think. But then
Hmm.
one of the zombies' abilities was that they could try to drain water from the target, doing damage to them. And then if they succeeded, they would get like much tougher and essentially become like a separate type of zombie with all these separate powers. And I really liked the idea, but it was the problem was it was hard to manage all of that as the DM. So sometimes I definitely go a bit overboard with what what works out in my constant attempts to find something that I haven't done before.
Well, it's always great to push your boundaries, to always try new ideas because that's the only way that you're going to learn, right? To experience and to try new things, to discover new avenues, and honestly, to find new mechanics there. Your idea of the desert zombies, so to speak, there are I call them like moisture suckers or whatever. It kind of reminds me that, rather, it kind of inspires me to make like a horror themed Dune, Dune kind of one
Yeah,
shot or
that's kind
something.
of exactly where they could come. I called them thirst zombies. So
Ah,
yeah.
thirst zombies.
So
Mm.
yeah, definitely something like. And I love a desert also. I've run like 2 campaigns that had a substantial desert element, and I don't know why, but I just love the desert, and I just think it's really fun. So it would have fit right well in a Dune type scenario.
For sure, for sure. And we have another question from our audience there. They ask, how do you handle a situation where you, as a player, realizes a mistake in picking equipment, but midway through? How would you address that?
Um, well. I guess it would depend. I mean, if it's some kind of basic, uh, like you pick the wrong armor or whatever, that's easily adjustable. If it was something like you picked the wrong magic item and you wanted something different, it could be a little tricky. But I try to be pretty easygoing with stuff like that. I mean, I don't necessarily want somebody to be able to change their whole character, but if they if they really try out a spell for a little bit and they realize that they just hate it and they don't want to use it, then they could switch a spell. And same sort of thing with equipment. Um,
Hmm.
oh, a lot of that stuff could just be dealt with by talking to the DM directly. Hey, there might be this problem. Maybe I could switch to this, and usually it's not a big deal, or at least we can
Indeed.
find some kind of happy medium.
I personally find that, if you're playing online there, just sending a little whisper or a PM to your DM, so to
Mhm.
speak, there goes a long way.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always try to tell people, feel free to send me a Discord message or something in Roll20 or whatever. Then we can
Mhm.
usually sort it before it becomes a thing. Hopefully.
Exactly, exactly. And it's an excellent way, text chat is one of those wonderful, wonderful advantages of the future here, where you could essentially hold a side discussion or a side conversation without disrupting, the table's play or even the game flow, so to speak. In your vast experience in D&D, do you prefer to be behind the DM screen or in front of the DM screen as a player? What's your personal preference?
Um, Honestly, yeah, I really have to say, I guess I prefer to be behind the DM screen. I mean, I don't mind playing. I like playing. It can be
Mhm.
really fun as a break, but I don't know. I've been somebody who's DM'd, the vast majority of my time in D&D from, a long time ago.
Mhm.
Many years ago. I'm not going to go into any specific dates, but I'm old. So, you
Mhm.
know, it's but I really enjoy it. And I feel like I've kind of developed a skill set that works, but at the same time, I would always encourage somebody that might have some interest in going from a player to DM to just give it a shot. I mean, like it's not something where you feel like you have to be an expert before you do it. You kind of have to like learn as you go.
DMing is all about practice. It's about experience. And oftentimes, as you
Mhm.
touched on before, it's trial and error, right? You find an optional rule set, or perhaps
Exactly.
homebrew a new monster, or find a new magical item, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to tweak that just a little bit," and then all of a sudden you realize, "Oh, I have made a horrible mistake." Oh, looks like we have a couple more questions coming in there. Do you have more time to spare there, Peregrine, with your?
I do.
Well, thank you kindly there.
I don't know how wonderful it is, but yeah, I'd be glad to.
Well, we've been chatting for closer to an hour. I must say it's captivating at the very least. So as we're waiting for them to fill out the questions, I suppose that I can ask another question as well. Peregrine, you touched upon Greyhawk before there. Would you say that is your favorite?
Well, I mean, I tend to I have I have GM'd in Greyhawk, I've GM'd in the Forgotten Realms, I've GM'd in other places, but and I do homebrew most of my settings anyway. But I do really I like Greyhawk. It's it's from such an early era of D&D. It really has this weird feel and a vibe, like much more, I don't know, like real and grounded. And nothing wrong with Forgotten Realms, but Forgotten Realms is very like high fantasy from top to the bottom. But Greyhawk is not, it has parts that are just really weird. And it's fun to be able to, if you can go online and you can search for maps of Greyhawk, it's this huge expanse of a world. And you can really just say, hey, this looks like a pretty cool area, drop a campaign there and go. And when I was doing that first campaign in 5e, where I was setting it in Greyhawk, I found this website and this Discord server called Cannon Fire, and it's all based on all set with Greyhawk. And so I started talking to these people on the Discord, and they were like, Oh, you know who you should talk to? This guy. He wrote the module in second edition for that. And it turned out there's just like all these people that have like that wrote the original material like in the 80s and 90s, that are on those things, and it's crazy. So nothing wrong with Forgotten Realms, but I kind of feel like it's gotten a little bit
Mm.
like stale, by just being used so much. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
just me.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to play however you want and whatever
At the
however
end
you
of the
want.
day, you have to play what you like, right? Whether that be high fantasy, sci-fi, something a little strange, and odd like Greyhawk,
Hmm.
perhaps something more, something more. I should say well visited like Forgotten Realms. But we do have another question that's pouring in there, and this perhaps might be the last one for
Sure.
this evening. Um, they ask, how do you even imagine these encounters? How do you create these encounters? Is it relative to where you are geographically, or what inspires you, so to speak?
That's a good question, actually. Uh, I I guess I feel like I'm kind of being based in history helps me because if I want to do, say a desert encounter, I mean, I'm not going to, take it
Hmm.
straight out of like Egyptian mythology, but I'm very familiar with that. So I can sort of like gives me a starting point. Um I think when it comes to making encounters, you kind of just have I know people who are like potential DMs always get tired of people just saying you just have to do it, but you know, it really is kind of like you just have to keep trying at it, and maybe your first encounters aren't that good and they're kind of like basic, but hey, as long as people have fun with it, it works. Um, so and also it kind of depends. You may have had like I do, and not every DM does this. I like to do a lot of traveling encounters. Like I like to have, okay, you're traveling from here to here because you're trying to get somewhere, and you're gonna, I want to have something set up for, okay, when you meet this village or maybe you meet this town, different stuff that happens. Not everyone likes that. Some people like to really just skip ahead. Um, but I feel like it helps nail things down. So like in a adventure recently, the party had gone to this large town and it really was nothing special to them. It was just on the way to somewhere else that they were going. And when they went in there to find an inn, they found out that like the people were worried that a plague was going to come, and a plague had arrived at this other nearby town, and essentially a plague panic started. And they shut the gate, and suddenly the party found themselves like trapped inside. And I didn't even know like exactly how it was gonna work out because I mean they're pretty powerful. I figured if they went out, they
Hmm.
can get out. They can climb over the wall or like cast Misty Step or whatever. But eventually, it worked out that they got hired to like go through these secret smugglers tunnels that had been long abandoned to like get these merchants out that had also been trapped in. But of course, then did they have the plague? Do we have the plague? Are we taking the plague out to spread it somewhere else? So these discussions really bloomed up in the party. And it kind of went from like one thing that I just threw together, that there was a plague to like the whole adventure basically. And then they learned later after they had left that there actually had never been any plague. So, you sometimes you can just start with something and kind of like build from there. Also, and in this day and age, I really have to say, I'm not going to be the kind of person that's going to say like don't use AI, but I feel like for me, AI is good for ideas. Like I don't want AI to come up with an encounter for me, but if I'm stuck, I want AI to like say, "Here's throw me 20 ideas of how something like this could
Indeed,
work," and
indeed,
I'm like,
indeed.
"Oh, that one
Um,
kind of sounds interesting," and then I could build
I don't
off
have
it.
much experience with AI in my creative pursuits, but definitely on a professional basis, I find that AI is a great soundboard. When you have an idea, or if you're in search of inspiration, right? They have so much information at their digital fingertips, so to speak, there, that it would be foolish not to ask, right? Not to take advantage of that, to find some kind of springboard moment, so to speak, there.
Yeah. Before AI really got going, more in the last few years, I and this sounds stupid, but it somehow worked for me. Um, I would go to one of these websites where it generates nouns or words, and I would just generate like 10 words and throw out any obviously modern words. And just seeing several words together, random words, would give me sort of an idea for like something I could latch on to. And I made a couple of really, adventures that I'm sure I never
That's
would
a
have thought
really
about,
creative idea. I
except
really,
I
really
just
like that
saw
there,
random
Peregrine.
words and they
Perhaps I'll
sort
try
of
that
worked.
next time. And it actually leads me to a personal experience of mine where I like to tell new DMs myself. I tend to DM at a comic book shop near my place, and w- to kind of link back to our earlier conversation about how do you design encounters, like where do you come up with these types of encounters there. um, I always tell them one thing, and that is find something that is cool to you. Find just one idea, one little thing, or just that what if moment of, hey, this sounds really cool to me. And then say, what if? Where does that go? Take that idea and run with it. See where it leads you.
Yeah.
Because as you and I have both know at this particular point, it will lead you to a wonderful place, whether it's to a plague, plague scared town, okay, where the party intentionally just creates their own mini adventure just to escape said town, or it takes them to some like long forgotten forest there because of, oh hey, what if we did this, right? And I think that's just the concept of taking that first step.
And I would also say one final thing
Mhm.
is that, and this is something you'll always hear, but it's really true. I mean, feel free to steal from whatever inspires you. If you're super into movies, if you're into video games, if you're into like superhero stuff, take that. I mean, to be honest, like to me, a superhero group really translates pretty easily into like an adventuring group. So if you want to make that, make it. Make that the superhero group are these, kind of like conceited adventurers that are super powerful, and they like look down on these like the rest of the party because they're these like new guys, and all it takes is just one thing and then another thing and then another thing, and before you know it, you've got an encounter. So yeah, like just
Mhm.
take it from
Exactly,
one, yeah, like
exactly.
you said, just go from
And
one
with
thing and
that,
just
there, folks,
go.
we've come to this session's natural conclusion of Roll for Insight there. Firstly, and most importantly, I'd love to thank our guest, Peregrine, for sharing his experiences and advice and memorable stories. So please, thank you so much for taking the time to share this all with us there. And of course, a big, big thank you to our audience as well. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for nominating Peregrine. None of this would be possible without you there and without your support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, if you do have a Dungeon Master in mind that you would like to nominate for this particular series, we do have a Google form available for submission, which I will submit to the chat now. And of course, if your nominee is not currently on the server, please invite them here so that we have a way to reach them. And of course, we do prioritize guests with the GM role first for this particular series, but we are more than happy to work with you and your nominee if they don't have it, just to make sure, they're here and they're reachable here on Alt Roll there. With that being said, thank you again for attending today's event there, and we do hope to see you next time on Roll for Insight there. Peregrine, do you have any last words for perhaps our audience or any budding GMs out there?
I would just say give it a shot. I mean, people are always worried that, they're not going to be any good, or, and the thing, it just doesn't matter. As long as people have fun, especially if you play with other new players, they don't know. I don't know, what if you didn't exactly do it the way you planned, just do it, and you know you can only get better.
Crack your dice, let's roll tonight. All the fun in the spotlight. Inside sharp and laughter bright. We're tuning in for delight. Roll for insight, here we go. Jump right in it.